Hey guys, I don't know why all these lectures are missing. They weren't when I posted them, but it's Canvas, and Canvas apparently is eating all the things I wish that it wouldn't. So let me do this human development lecture and try to get that moving for you. Give me just a sec to get some things set up on my end. I apologize for that. Let's see if we can get this working. All right, so let's go ahead and do the pre-lecture assignment real quick. I will fill in these blanks. All right, so the first thing we have is, let's see, get my pen to work for me. All right. So we're going to do, this first one here is fertilization. And fertilization is the union of a sperm and an egg to form a zygote. The head of a sperm is capped with something called an acrosome. Which is an organelle that has digestive enzymes, so that when it meets the egg, those digestive enzymes are able to penetrate the membrane that's around the egg itself so that fertilization can take place. The plasma membrane of the egg is surrounded by an extracellular matrix, and this is called the zona. Hang on a second. Lucida. Okay. And then this in turn is surrounded by a few layers of cells, which is called the corona radiata. Corona. Sorry for the writing. This little like pen and board is super convenient, but not all that awesome when it comes to always being neat. Okay, during fertilization, several sperm are actually going to penetrate that corona radiata. After one of the sperm heads binds tightly then to that zona pellucida, the acrosome releases digestive enzymes that allow the sperm to actually fertilize the egg. So then this next part, the plasma membranes of the egg and sperm fuse, and the nucleus of the sperm enters the egg. Nucleus with all of the genetic information, which remember in sperm is haploid. So it'll have half the number of chromosomes that a fully developed human will have. Once it joins with the DNA of the egg, you'll end up with 46, the diploid number. To prevent something called polyspermy, when a sperm comes in contact with the egg's plasma membrane becomes depolarized, okay? And that keeps any of the other sperm that are there, that have come in contact with that corona radiata, it keeps them from being able to actually fuse with the egg as well, so that only one happens. That's how it's supposed to work anyway. Okay, oops. 4 stages of human development with their description. All right, so when the cells are dividing, but they're not actually increasing in size, this stage is called cleavage. So it's increasing in number, or they're increasing in number, but not in size. Cell division, where the cells will increase in size, is called growth. Cells migrate and the embryo assumes a shape. This stage is called morphogenesis. And cells take on specific structures and function. This is differentiation. Okay. All right. So that is the information in this pre-lecture. Let's continue. Sorry, this isn't working like it should. There we go. Okay. All right, so let's continue. In the stage of pre-embryonic development, during this first week of development, this is still technically called a zygote, okay? So the zygote undergoes cleavage division, which again is where we have the cells reproducing rapidly, but they're not increasing in size, okay? So the zygote undergoes this cleavage division. Again, so it'd be like having a loaf of bread, right? And it's just being cut into pieces. So it's not like you're getting more bread. It's just that the bread that's there is being cut into pieces. You can think about cleavage like a cleaver, like this big knives. If you need help remembering that there's no growing in size, it's just increasing the amount, okay? And then we move on to a stage called the blastocyst. The blastocyst consists of an inner cell mass, which will become, come on, Pen, where are you? I'm back over here, which will become the embryo. And then an outer cell ring, kind of. And this is going to become the chorion, or the fetal side of the placenta. That doesn't look like an R. That's an R, everybody. Okay, so again, chorion, fetal side of the placenta. And you can see that right here. In this diagram, this is going to have most of the stuff we'll talk about will be in these diagrams, in this diagram specifically. And so this chorion is going to wrap around the embryo. Okay, that's in this sac. Then we move on to the allantois. The vessels emerge from the embryo at this point. That is right here. Okay. And this is going to become the umbilical cord, which you could probably guess due to its location. Okay. Then we have the yolk sac. In the yolk sac, this is actually where the blood, red blood cells are going to develop until the bone marrow is developed and functioning. Oops. Then we have the amnion. The amnion is the membrane that's going to be closest to the embryo, and its job is to help cushion and protect. That was supposed to be an and sign. It doesn't look like an and sign. Let's just pretend. Okay. So you've probably heard about amniotic fluid. It's this fluid that is inside of this membrane, the amnion, in the amniotic cavity. And again, the fluid is also there to help cushion and protect baby. When somebody talks about their water breaking, it's actually the sac that surrounds the amniotic fluid. So the membrane of the amnion will rupture and all the amniotic fluid is released. Okay. All right, so after fertilization and after we've hit the point of blastocyst development, we're going to move on to implantation. And during implantation, this is when the chorion, remember the fetal side of the placenta, invades, if you will, the uterine tissue. So basically, you have the lining of the uterus, and then you have, the developing zygote, and the chorion, which is around it, is going to attach itself, burrow in to the actual wall of the uterus, that inside wall of the uterus, and will become anchored there so that development can continue. And as this happens, we have this extension of the blood vessels so that mom and baby can be connected. Side. Okay. So naturally, this is where implantation is supposed to take place. It's supposed to happen in the uterus. However, there are cases where implantation happens someplace else in the body. That could be a fallopian tube. In rare cases, that can actually even happen outside of the reproductive tract. Although one of the most common places is to happen for implantation to take place in the fallopian tube itself. So an ectopic pregnancy Obviously, this is going to be a problem for a lot of reasons. One of the biggest being that without the correct attachments for all those blood vessels, there's no nutrients or oxygen getting to that embryo that's developing. Another issue is the uterus is made to expand, right, with a growing embryo. That's not true of any other body part. So fallopian tube can only extend so far before it will rupture. So even if the embryo is developing and cell division and all of that is taking place, eventually the size itself will rupture the fallopian tube. And if it's happening outside of the uterus and outside of the reproductive tract and other areas, similar complications occur. They can be very dangerous to mom. Ectopic pregnancies generally require emergency surgery. Perhaps if it's caught early enough, it's not necessarily emergency, but if you have a ruptured fallopian tube due to ectopic pregnancy, emergency surgery. And at this point, there is no way in medicine to save that pregnancy. It will be terminated. If it hasn't spontaneously terminated, if it's caught prior to that, it still has to be ended in order to keep mom healthy. And again, it doesn't have any way to survive where it implanted anyway. And we don't have the ability, medicine science doesn't have the ability to implant that embryo into the uterus where it belongs. Okay. All right, let's talk about human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG. This is secreted by the chorion, which isn't a surprise considering there's that word right there. Okay. And this is the hormone that is detected in pregnancy tests. Today, pregnancy tests are easy. There would be the proverbial peeing on a stick, and in the urine, there would be traces of HCG about the third week of pregnancy, so the third week following fertilization. And those hormones are picked up in the urine tests. In the past, it was not that easy. Women would have to go into the doctor and blood would be taken, and the blood from the woman who was suspected of being pregnant was actually injected into a rabbit. And if the woman was pregnant, it would be fatal to the rabbit. So your positive pregnancy test came back if the rabbit died. There are still sitcoms, from back in the day, including like the Dick Van Dyke Show. I don't know if you guys have ever even seen that, where it makes reference to that type of pregnancy test. It's pretty interesting. Okay, anyway, so HCG is secreted by the chorion at about 3 weeks. Again, this is the third week of pregnancy / the third week from fertilization. So HCG acts as a luteinizing hormone. In other words, it maintains the luteum, which is going to continue the pregnancy, and it's going to keep the endometrium healthy, and it prevents, the regular menstrual cycle from taking place. All right, so then we hit this next phase here. where we're going to have morphogenesis taking place. And again, remember that this is when the embryo is going to kind of start taking shape. And this happens because cells migrate to create different levels and layers of the developing fetus. Ugh, so bad. It's like chicken scratch. I'm sorry, guys. Let me tell you. I moved from Texas about a month ago, and I am back in St. George. In the move, my cord that goes from my computer to my little whiteboard and pen was lost. This nice long cord. And so I'm using a cord that's like, I don't know, maybe 12 inches, looks more like 10. And it doesn't give me any room to actually put my tablet into a comfortable writing position. So not only is it a little bit of a difficult tool to use normally, as far as your writing doesn't always look super clear, I have the added issue of having it propped up on random household objects so that it can stay attached to my computer and I can write on it. There you go. It's the magic behind the lecture. Aren't you excited? Moving on. All right, so as these cells migrate to form layers, those layers are going to include things called the primary germ layers, starting with the endoderm. And the endoderm will eventually differentiate into the digestive tract. It looks like a kindergartner, doesn't it? Look like a kindergartner's writing this, or like somebody's writing with their feet. I bet they do better than I'm doing right now. Next layer is the mesoderm, and the mesoderm will become muscles and bones and parts of the circulatory system. And then we have the ectoderm, and the ectoderm will become the skin and the nervous system. Ooh. Okay, let's move on. This back up, put that over there. Okay. So as the embryo continues to develop, around the 8-week mark, we have the germ layers are going to give rise to cells that will differentiate into specific types of cells that will then form the tissues of specific organs. And as that happens, those organs form and take their place-ish in the body. And obviously those organs will continue to develop and continue to settle into place as the fetus grows. These are basically referring to stem cells. And stem cell technology is controversial because true stem cells are going to come from, an embryo. And that means that either a pregnancy was terminated on purpose, or there was a miscarriage. The mom spontaneously miscarried. And so in order to harvest stem cells, you have to take it from a pregnancy that has ended. But these cells do have the ability to be prompted to generate into all kinds of organs because that's what they do, right? It started out something as something undifferentiated and then changed as development continues into a liver, a kidney, a stomach, skin, eyes, the whole thing, right? The entire body. So, yeah, that's the amazing part about stem cells. And obviously, when it comes to organ donation and organ replacement, I should say, has a lot of applications. But again, where those stem cells come from, it's kind of hard to digest. Question of the day: why do most birth defects occur in the first 8 weeks? That's because this is really when the body systems start to develop. And so if there's going to be issues with body systems, it'll happen during this time frame. After that, it's mostly just growth that takes place after that 8-week mark, growth and continued development. Okay, let's talk about the placenta. The placenta secretes both estrogen and progesterone. Okay, and the job there is to inhibit follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, which are both required for part of the menstrual cycle. So that's going to inhibit the cycle from continuing so that pregnancy can be supported. And it does this by preventing the development of another egg. It keeps another follicle from maturing or developing. Okay. And then the progesterone as well will support, nourish. I mean, it's not really quite the right word, but it kind of creates a better picture of what it does. The endometrium. I guess maintain is a better. Why don't women ovulate when they're pregnant? Because of this. The power team of estrogen and progesterone. All right, so we've already talked about the fact that embryonic blood vessels will infiltrate the endometrium, and this is where gas exchange is going to occur between mom and baby. The blood, however, between the mom and the baby do not mix. So it's like an exchange through tissues, an exchange of waste, of gases, of nutrients. But the blood itself does not come into contact while during pregnancy. During delivery, that may happen, but not during pregnancy. This is usually a question on one of your tests, just FYI. Okay. Okay, so then we look at the umbilical cord itself. This is where the vessels that supply blood to the embryo are located. Okay, and they carry deoxygenated blood from the fetus to the placenta, where it can be exchanged. The umbilical arteries. I'm gonna put deoxy, so I don't have to write out the whole thing. Deoxygenated blood from fetal tissues to the placenta. The umbilical veins carry oxygenated blood from the placenta to the fetus. So it's kind of backwards from what is happening in, you know, a baby after it's born, and all of us. And us, arteries are going to be carrying oxygenated blood, veins carry deoxygenated blood, but in this whole fetus, embryo, development process, it's the opposite, it's reversed. So arteries carry deoxygenated blood away from the fetus, and veins carry oxygenated blood to the fetus, which is this little chart shows here. Fetal heart, blood circulates to the tissues. The umbilical arteries pick up that blood, which has now been deoxygenated, to the placenta. And then new oxygenated blood is sent back through the veins to the heart. So just remember, it's the opposite of what happens in somebody that's already born. Okay. So we have part of our little fetal body happening right here. So to continue to talk a bit about fetal circulation, one of the things that happens, or that a fetus has, that is not present or should not be present in a delivered baby, is something called a foramen ovale. This is a hole that sits right in between the left and right atria of the heart. It's like getting worse as I go. Okay, get this out of the way real quick. So it's this little open space right in here. Okay. So in a fetus or in an embryo, when in a fetus, the lungs aren't mature enough to do the whole process of, well, breathing, obviously, right? So most of that blood is going to bypass the lungs. We still need some there because the blood that does pass to the lungs is required for the development of the lungs and the respiratory tract. But otherwise, it's going to bypass that. In fetal circulation, some of the oxygenated blood that comes in the right atrium is diverted to the left via the foramen ovale. There's also something called the ductus arteriosus. And this connects the pulmonary artery to the aorta. Okay, again, I've already told you about the fact that most of that blood is going to completely bypass the lungs, and the blood that is going through the lungs is not there to be oxygenated or or deoxygenated. It's there to help the lung tissue grow. Okay, so at birth, both of these bypasses in the fetal circulatory system are supposed to close. Okay. The inflation of the lungs at birth creates a vacuum that will pull the blood from the right atrium to the lungs. And when this happens, it forces a little flap closed over the opening that was the foraminal valve. And then as far as the ductus arteriosus at birth, cells will grow rather rapidly and close the duct. All right, so what happens with an infant that is preterm? So preterm infants are on respirators after birth, and that helps to draw the blood to the lungs. And eventually, even in preterm infants, those bypasses, foraminal valve, the ductus arteriosus, will close on their own. However, if they don't, surgery is required. Okay, guys, thank you for hanging with me on this. And I don't know if you have questions.